The Earth colony on Veylara Prime was as gray and cold as the endless rain that pelted its metal streets. For Ethan Ward, life had become nothing more than dull shifts at the hydroponics lab, followed by long, silent evenings in his cramped habitation pod. He had no family here. No friends either. The other colonists spoke in passing, but never stayed long enough for conversation. He wasn't disliked, just invisible. He used to tell himself that it didn't bother him, that he preferred solitude. But there were only so many meals you could eat alone before the silence started feeling like it had weight, pressing down on you until you started wondering if anyone would notice if you were gone. That was the state Ethan was in the day he met her. Hashtag the girl from the crash. The storm had knocked out half the colony's power grid. While repair teams worked through the night, Ethan volunteered to check the irrigation lines near the southern perimeter, mostly because it gave him an excuse to avoid the crowded mess hall. He was halfway through his inspection when he saw the wreckage. Something had come down hard in the marsh just beyond the colony walls. Charred metal twisted into jagged spears, smoke hissing where rain met fire. He moved closer cautiously, rifle in hand, though it was laughable to think he'd need it. No ship this damage carried survivors. He was wrong. At the very center of the wreckage lay a girl. She wasn't human. Her skin had a soft lavender hue, glistening faintly under the rain. Dark silver hair clung to her face in soaked strands. She was small, barely reaching his chest as she'd been standing. Except she couldn't stand, because she had no legs. Where her hips ended, smooth pale flesh tapered into nothing, as if she'd been born that way. When her eyes fluttered open, bright and startlingly blue, they locked on him with a mixture of fear and stubborn defiance. "Stay back," she rasped in halting English. I can handle this." Ethan blinked at her, at the burning wreckage around them, at the fact she was clearly in no condition to handle anything. "Lady," he said, voice dry, "you're half dead and missing a ship. And legs." Her glare could have cut steel. Thanks for the observation. Against his better judgment, Ethan scooped her up. She was light, shockingly so, as if her bones were hollow. The girl didn't fight him, though she muttered something under her breath in a language he didn't know. He carried her back through the rain, unaware that this single choice was about to change both their lives. Hashtag strangers in the same silence. The colony doctor patched her up as best as he could. Miraculously, nothing vital was damaged, at least nothing more than already was. She gave her name as Lira. Her ship? Gone. Her crew? She didn't answer that part. The doctor guessed she was maybe 18 by human standards, though who knew how alien aging worked. When the doctor asked about family or contacts, Lira looked away. Ethan recognized that look. It was the same one he saw in the mirror every morning. The colony leaders wanted to transfer her off-world once transport was available. Until then, she needed somewhere to stay. Ethan surprised himself by volunteering. Maybe it was because he lived alone. Maybe because she clearly had no one else. Maybe because when she sat there in the infirmary bed, small and quiet and obviously pretending not to be scared, he felt something crack open in his chest. A feeling he hadn't let himself feel in years. Hashtag learning to live without legs. Lira hated asking for help. That became clear in the first week. She moved using her arms, strong and quick despite her size, dragging herself where she needed to go rather than letting him carry her. The colony provided a hover sled for mobility, but she used it only when necessary, preferring to navigate the cramped pod on her own. Ethan didn't push. He understood pride, but he noticed the small things, like how she'd pause sometimes, staring at the rain outside his single narrow window, face unreadable, or how she never mentioned home, or how, despite everything, she spoke with sharp wit when she felt like it. One evening, after he nearly burned dinner, and she snorted trying not to laugh, he said, "Go ahead, say it. I can't cook to save my life." "You can't cook to save anyone's life," she said solemnly, then ruined it with a small smile. It hit him. Then how long it had been since someone had smiled at him like that? Hashtag 2 kinds of broken. One night during another endless storm, she finally told him the truth. Her people were explorers. Her ship had been scouting deep space routes when raiders attacked. She escaped in a life pod. The rest of her crew didn't. And the legs? "Born this way," she said flatly. "Waste of good genetics, according to my father." Not that he said it out loud. Ethan didn't know what to say to that. He wanted to tell her she wasn't a waste of anything, but the words tangled on his tongue. Instead, he said, "My parents wanted a soldier. Got me instead." She looked at him then, really looked, at the calluses on his hands from lab work instead of weapons training, at the quiet slump of someone used to being overlooked. 2 kinds of broken," she murmured. "Yeah," he said softly. "Guess so." But in that tiny pod, with rain drumming the roof, he realized neither of them felt quite as broken when the other was around. Hashtag when the colony turned. Not everyone approved of her staying. Some colonists muttered about security risks. Others just didn't like outsiders, especially alien ones. One afternoon, someone painted freak across Ethan's door in dripping red letters. He tried to scrub it off before Lira saw. Failed. She stared at the word for a long moment, expression unreadable. Then she turned to him with a shrug. "They're not wrong," she said. "I am a freak." Something in him snapped. "No," he said fiercely. "You're alive when you shouldn't be. You're smarter than half the people in this colony. You're amazing, Lira. They're just too stupid to see it." Her eyes widened slightly, as if no one had ever said anything like that to her before. She didn't reply. But that night, he noticed she slept without her usual restless tossing. Hashtag the offer. Weeks passed. Transport finally arrived, a chance for Lira to leave, to find her people again if any remained. She should have been thrilled. Instead, she stood by the door of his pod, silent for a long time. "You'll be fine," she said finally, not looking at him. "Sure," he said, forcing a smile. Back to eating terrible dinners alone, living the dream. That earned him a small laugh. Then her expression softened in a way he'd never seen before. "You could come," she said quietly. "With me?" The words hit harder than any storm. Leave the colony? The planet? Go with her into whatever life waited out there? He almost said yes on the spot. But then he looked at her, really looked, at the girl who had lost her crew, her ship, her home, who had no legs but more strength than anyone he knew. She didn't need him to save her. But maybe, just maybe, she wanted him there anyway. Hashtag a different kind of home. In the end, Ethan packed his things. When the transport lifted off, carrying one human and one stubborn, sharp-tongued, legless alien girl into the unknown, Nita looked back at the gray colony fading below. They didn't know what waited ahead. New world, new dangers, maybe even new losses. But as Lira dozed beside him, head leaning lightly on his shoulder, Ethan realized something. For the first time in years, the silence around him didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt like home.